Hey, it's Beth at North Atlantic Fiber Arts in Paris House Woolworks. And the other day it came to my attention online that rug hookers were going to pretty drastic lengths to keep the previous loop from pulling out when they go to pull the current loop. And this is a problem that I have seen literally hundreds of times over the past decade or more of teaching beginners. And I thought, I don't have a video on this. I'm going to make a video on how to prevent this because it's such a simple tweak and it's something that, you don't have to suffer with anymore. So I have my Camp frame set up right here in my Rockland studio, and I'm gonna pop the camera into the overhead bracket, and we're gonna see how to fix this really, really common and easy to fix problem. Okay, I'm going to start with wool strip because that is one of the more common things that people hook with. We're going to also talk about yarn and sari silk, but I'll start by just getting a tail up as you normally would whenever you're hooking, and I'm going to do just a few loops to get us started. But then I'm going to show you how it happens that these loops get pulled out. So if when you are hooking, you are pulling the current loop towards yourself or even the slightest pressure towards yourself, you're going to pull out the loop behind. And don't get confused. It's okay to hook in the direction of yourself, but the pressure on the individual loop, if that is towards yourself, you are pulling this out. I am going to zoom in just a little bit and move this so that you can see a little bit more closely. So here I am pulling a normal loop. Here I am if the pressure on the hook is just a little bit in the wrong direction and it wants to pull the one out behind. Similarly, if when you're pulling a loop, you pop the loop up, it didn't do it in that case, but sometimes, let's see if we can get it to do it, you pop the loop up without bringing it up in just a gentle, smooth motion, you can also end up pulling the loop behind it out. So this is really important, and it's just often just a very simple correction. When you pull the loop up, either bring it up with the pressure straight up or even a little bit toward the loop that you just pulled. And that is going to prevent you from having that problem. Okay, so let's talk now about using yarn, because sometimes people like to hook with yarn. I know I like to hook with yarn quite often, and some people like to hook with really fine yarns, or maybe that's something that you happen to have in your stash and you're thinking, oh, that'd look really pretty in my in whatever the project is. It's the same thing. I'm going to go underneath and I'm going to start pulling these loops up. Now, because this yarn is fine, it's even more susceptible to pulling out. So there's a few things I do with yarn to try to mitigate that. One is what I just showed you with the wool strip. I make sure that I'm not pulling away from the loop behind it so that I'm not pulling directly on it and pulling it out. The other thing is I tend to pull yarn a little bit higher than I pull my wool strips. So that's another way to kind of keep them in place. But then additionally, another thing I do, especially with thinner yarns, is I will double or triple them. And that also helps to hold them in place. So when you double or triple yarns, you end up with a really lovely texture on the surface that can be really nice. And it's also a little bit easier to keep those loops in place. I'll zoom in on that a little bit. Oops, that's zooming out. There we go. And you can see how nice they look. But again, just like with the wool strip, if I go and pull away from the one behind me, I'm going to end up pulling it out. Finally, I'm going to show you sari silk. And once you've seen these three examples, it really does apply to almost anything. So again, I'm just going to start hooking with my sari ribbon. Just going to put some loops in. These are much less prone to pulling out just because This is a pretty thick ribbon that holds in just about any foundation. But just to show you the point of what I've been talking about, if you go in and you're pulling your loop and you're pulling it away from the loop behind it, you're still going to pull it out. And, you know, if you go in and you're bringing the next loop up with like a force or pop, you're still going to pull the loop out behind it. And this kind of, you can kind of see how that just happened. So really, what shouldn't have to ever happen is that you have anything on the top side holding your loops in place while you're pulling subsequent loops. You should never have tape or anything on the bottom of the side holding your loops in place while you're pulling other loops. And what you really always want to aspire to is a very small local motion as you're pulling your loops. You don't want to have your wrist into it. You don't want to have your elbow into it. You don't want to be struggling. All of that is going to protect your hooking life for decades. You don't want ergonomic injuries, but at the same time, you do want to make sure that your loops are looking the way you want them to look. And whether that's all uniform, which is completely unnecessary. Some people like uniform traditional directional loops. Some people like a more abstract look. Both of them are of equal beauty and value. But whatever technique you're doing, just make sure that you're protecting yourself by keeping your pulling smooth, keeping it in the right direction so that, again, we're not pulling the loop behind it out. And you should be hooking for a long time. If you have any questions at all, you can get in touch with me at parishousewoolworks@gmail.com or northatlanticfiberarts@gmail.com. And I look forward to your comments and questions. Thank you.